Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here today to renew the ties, to deepen the ties between our great nations. And I want to start by paying tribute to the India Global Forum for its pursuit of that goal. And in particular, to thank you, Manoj, for the generous invitation for me to be here today to make this speech. In the presence of the High Commissioner, both High Commissioners, it's good to see you again and thank you again. And of course, being so many leaders in British Indian industry here, it's an incredible privilege for me to be here. And as I look out from here across this room, I see leaders in healthcare, in science, technology, pharmaceuticals, education, hospitality and retail. Leaders of some of the UK's most successful companies, some of the finest minds in academia, public servants who've given so much to this country, people who work tirelessly for their community, give so much back to people here and in India. It's a room which in itself is testament to the dynamism of the British Indian community. And I have a clear message for all of you today. This is a changed Labour Party. Across the board, we've embraced the power of enterprise. Understand that this is the only way to pay your way in the modern world. And this means that we see the Indian community for the success story you are in 21st century Britain. Success. It's such an important word. And I accept that in the past, Labour gave the impression we could only see the lives of people and communities who needed our support. But my Labour Party understands that what working people want in every community is success, aspiration and security. So we're increasing Indian representation at all levels in our party. And I'm excited to see some of the talent now serving their community on behalf of our party. And we now look at the contribution the British Indian community makes to Britain, and we celebrate it in all its glory. The role you play expanding our economy, strengthening our society, defining our culture, and let's be honest, running our country. The Prime Minister is part of this. And yes, on Wednesday we'll go back to knocking lumps out of each other. But I've always acknowledged how important it is for our country to have its first British Indian Prime Minister. It is fantastic. Now, don't get me wrong, I want to take his job. But that achievement is something nobody can take. And it's something India can be proud about as well. But whilst the relationship Britain has had with its Indian communities has been on a healthy and necessary journey, I still sense we need to walk a similar path with modern India. When the history of two great nations is intertwined, as ours is, that can cast a long shadow. But look, I don't see that shadow over today's India. I see a modern nation, a confident nation, a nation that knows that while there are profound challenges in the world at the moment, this is, without question, a time when the stability of nations is under threat, that the opportunity is there for this to be an Indian century, with India shining as the world's biggest democracy, a huge contributor to global growth and prosperity. Now, the challenge, as I see it now, is for Britain to step out of the shadows in its mind, to cast aside the entitlement of history and deepen our relationship with the real India, the modern India, the future India. And yes, look, we can celebrate our shared culture. We know as well as anyone that Indian food is the greatest in the world. And if the rest of the world continues to ignore the arcane wonder of cricket, we can laugh together at their misfortune. But we also know that this can't be the basis of a serious and deep diplomatic relationship in the modern world. And that is what my Labour government will seek with India. A relationship based on our shared values of democracy and aspiration that will seek a free trade agreement. We share that ambition, but also a new strategic partnership for global security, climate security, economic security. This is the essential truth of the world we live in. These three goals all depend on each other. We have a mutual interest in all of them, of course. But as Prime Minister Modi was setting out in the US recently, there are opportunities here as well. New technologies, new industries, new investments, where our interests clearly align. On artificial intelligence, for example, on the clean energy boom that hydrogen, offshore wind and carbon capture can provide. And in this increasingly volatile world, on the collective security of defence cooperation. Between our two nations, absolutely, but also working together to support other nations which might come under external pressure. A competition for the resources of the future and the risk of climate change begin to take their toll. There will be challenges, of course. I hope we never have to face something like COVID-19 again. But we can be proud of the role of our two countries in the rollout of the vaccine that saved millions of lives. That showed, even in tough times, the strength and opportunity of our partnership. So I'm excited to learn more as this forum progresses, particularly this week. And I hope to visit India in the near future. But in short, this is the nature of the relationship that we would seek. Open-handed, respectful, forward-looking, and aspirational, that understands the history of our two great nations, doesn't shy away from it, but recognises that just as our communities have found a new way, so must our nations. For growth, for aspiration, for those three layers of security that define the modern world, but above all, for the shared national interests of two great countries that working together can show the value of democracy in pursuit of the opportunities of the future. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
Yeah. Gentlemen, Sir Keir Starmer, thank you so much. Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Lovely to see you. How are you?
Very good.
Good. So, very interesting listening to your words there about looking into the future. I wonder what you mean, and I wonder, putting it in the words that a Gen X might understand, myself, does this mean you want to press Control-Alt-Delete, reset the relations between the UK and India?
Look, I do think we need to look forward, not backwards. And I do think, from time to time, resetting is the right approach. And what I'm trying to set out today is the basis of that future relationship that recognises the past, of course, but actually sees the two countries now going together in a relationship of openness and respect in the way I've tried to set out. So it's very much looking forward, not backwards, acknowledging the history, but actually setting out the aspiration, the ambition for the future.
So I think we also have to acknowledge some of the history between the Labour Party and India as well. And I think it's fair to say that the relationship between the Labour Party and India has been challenging, maybe even prickly. Why do you think that is?
Look, I think there are lots of issues in the Labour Party where, over the last 2 years, we have openly taken the decision to change our party, to look out to the world in a different way, and to recognise, when it comes to India, what an incredible, powerful, important country India is, a modern India going forward. and to ensure that we have the right relationship as we go forward. And that's why I want to be open about the trade deal, which I hope we can negotiate. I know, obviously, there are a number of rounds in, but we share that ambition. But see that only as the first step in a strategic partnership that goes way beyond just the trade.
What would you do? What would you push in order to get that trade deal done?
Look, I do think it's a question of being clear about what our values and priorities are. There's a lot of issues in the mix in the trade deal. I'm not privy to the rounds that are going on, the precise detail of it, but I think everybody understands the fundamentals in terms of goods and services and the skills mix that has to be part of the discussion of any trade agreement.
Let's look a little bit at how the UK economy looks and what that means for business, because you've been talking a lot about the message that Labour has for business. So I think interest rates were raised for the 13th time in a row last week. We've still got sticky inflation, low growth levels. Indian companies, as we heard from the High Commissioner, 954 of them can help this growth, right?
Yeah, we've got a real problem with our economy at the moment, and this is party political, so take it with a pinch of salt. But we've had very low growth now in our economy for 13 years. Every business understands this, and we have adopted an approach to the economy, as with most other things, of sticking plaster politics, where we don't fix the fundamentals. We then, against the backdrop of that low growth, ended up with a kamikaze budget last autumn, which did huge damage to our economy and to our reputation. I've lost the count of the number of businesses that say they would invest in the UK, but they don't see the stability.
I thought you were going to say you lost the number of prime ministers.
Well, but that is a key part of it, because it is on one level politically amusing that we've had in the last 12 months 3 prime ministers, 4 chancellors, 4 budgets. But actually, for the business community, this is really bad news, because what businesses need, and many people in this room will understand this intensely, is stability, strategy, a partnership with government where everybody knows where they stand and things don't chop and change. You can have 4 budgets in a year, 4 chancellors in a year, and claim that we've got the stability that we need for businesses. So we need to turn that around. And one of the issues I've been laying out this year is the sense that if there is a change of government next year, and I hope there is, and we get the privilege to serve, and I hope that we do, that we will be a mission-driven government. And what I mean by that is with a burning sense of purpose. What is it that we need to achieve? How will the government partner with businesses in order to drive that change? The number one mission is economic growth in this country. And so we look forward to partnering with many of the businesses in this room in a much more strategic way that creates the stability and the conditions in which we can move forward as a country.
And how will you encourage more investment from these Indian businesses are in the room who are coming to the UK to grow that number from 954 to beyond 1,000?
First and foremost, stability. We have to have stability. We need to get our economy back under control. Now, nobody is going to pretend, and I'm not going to pretend, that there aren't global features here. Of course there are. COVID, the conflict in Ukraine. But it is legitimate to ask, why is the UK always hit harder than other economies? We've got to sort that out if we're to attract investment. There's a huge amount of work to do on skills. Again, many people in this room will know about this. Most businesses saying, I can't get the skills I need where I need them. We absolutely have to address that, to create the conditions, take advantage of AI and technology, which is moving at pace and could be a huge boost for our economy if we get our arms around it and regulate properly. So there are things that we can do. I think one of the most important things is going to be the partnership arrangement where businesses and government work together strategically over a period of time, and that's what we've been missing.
What about trade with the EU? A lot of those Indian businesses would quite like to use this place as a jumping-off place for Europe. How are you going to improve that? How are you going to improve that even within this constraints of Brexit?
Well, we've left the EU, and we've just got to be clear about that, and there's no case for going back. We have to make Brexit work. I do think for businesses, there's a legitimate complaint that they've picked up much more red tape than they had. I call it Rishi's red tape. We need to reduce Rishi's red tape with a better and closer relationship with the EU. I do think there's areas we can work together on science and education, skills certainly, the creative sector on security. I think there are a number of ways in which we can improve on that relationship. But the idea that the deal that we've got was oven ready was a misdescription, I think, and most businesses will feel that it's actually made their life more difficult, not easier, and so we're going to have to address that.
I want to talk a little bit about healthcare reform. It's the 75th anniversary of the NHS next week. That's a big milestone, right? And I had surgery recently, and at one point I had a doctor who came into the room, and he'd already seen 99 other patients. Now that's an enormous amount of strain. I wonder how Indian healthcare workers, doctors and nurses and other skilled healthcare workers from India could help this.
Well, firstly, I think I should say a big thank you to the Indian community for everything they have already done. The NHS is like a religion in the UK, and the Indian community have done so much already in that regard, and do today. My wife works in the NHS, and we see this day in, day out. So it starts with a huge thank you in terms of the amount of work that's already gone in. As we go forward, obviously, we will need even more skills and talent. We have a plan to double the number of students coming through to become doctors, midwives, etc., into the NHS, the biggest expansion of the workforce since its creation. So that'll be a big part of the answer. But, you know, the NHS needs not just to be picked up, it's on its face, in my view, put on its feet again, but also we need to have the ambition to create the NHS of the future. I think just putting the NHS back where it needs to be, and it's in a bad place under this government, is step one, but then we need an NHS fit for the future. We're all living longer with different conditions, and we need to therefore move the approach. We need to use technology differently. We need to be in the prevention space much, much quicker. And community-based health. And I think this is a journey, just as we've gone through the first 75 years with a great contribution from the Indian community here, then we will go through the next 75, I'm sure, with that same contribution.
What about mobility, folks coming from India to the UK, in healthcare, other areas? How can Labour encourage that mobility?
Well, we need to get the skills balance right, and at the moment, I just don't think we've got a skills strategy to speak of. So we need the skills strategy. We need to therefore look at what skills we do have, what skills we do need, and at the moment, there's just a complete mismatch out there, I think.
Okay. Well, we're also, you mentioned artificial intelligence and the potential to collaborate there. We're hosting a debate later today. Which worries you more, artificial intelligence and climate change? How would you answer that question?
Oh, climate change is by far a greater threat than AI ever is. Climate change is a huge pressure on all of us. It's a huge opportunity as well, actually, as we go towards renewables, something I know that there's a lot of discussion in India about for obvious reasons. So climate change is, I think, the greater threat. It's already with us, and we have to have strategic answers to it. AI, of course, is a different proposition. It's an incredible form of technology going at pace, and can be a great source for good. I mean, one of the examples I used when I did a speech the other day on the future of the NHS was AI working with radiologists can identify much more quickly and much more accurately, 60% more accurately, early stage cancer, particularly in liver, etc. This is a massive, massive benefit, but we have to recognise that at the moment we haven't got regulation where we need it. We need a framework for regulation. We need a discussion in this forum and other places as to what form that regulation should take, because we need to make sure that it encourages the good use of AI, but without actually holding us back. But I think that's a debate we're now ready for. Huge potential in AI, but we do need to get a bit of regulation around it.
Have you ever used ChatGPT to write a speech, answer an email?
No, but lots of people in this room will recognise this. I've got a 14-year-old son who uses it all the time. And what's fascinating about that, he's got the app on his phone, is that for him, this is just normal. It's what he expects to happen. this is what life will be like. It's absolutely phenomenal. I mean, he's doing Great Expectations at school, and you can just ask for any answer to any question. And so I can see that, I've enjoyed it vicariously. I haven't used it for speeches, or I mean, I should one day I should just put in PMQs, just 6 questions.
Yeah, see what happens.
And see what it
Absolutely.
see what it throws up. But it is fascinating. It's at speed, huge potential, and as I say, for the generation that are my children, this is going to be as natural as electricity or emails.
Should ChatGPT be banned in schools? I think they should embrace it.
Well, I've got to tread carefully now. I think it should be embraced in the sense that it will be part of the mix as young people go forward, and we shouldn't try to hide it. I think it probably means that the skills we need from people in the future will change, because you won't need some of the rote stuff, but you will need people who are asking the right question, directing the information in the right place. These will be critical skills. We need to have a discussion with business as well, starting this afternoon, about the impact it'll have on the jobs market, because the potential for change is huge, and therefore what do we do to reskill people and enhance the jobs of people who might be affected by advances in AI.
Do you agree with the Prime Minister that the UK should be a leader in AI governance? Do you support that aspiration?
Yes, I do. We are already one of the leading nations when it comes to AI, and we are beginning to think about regulation. I mean, the Prime Minister wants to host a summit later in the year. That's a good first step, but we need to know what it is we're going to be discussing at that summit. And I think the starting point should be, for me, regulation and the impact on jobs. And on regulation, we've got to be careful what we're regulating. Somebody gave me this example the other day, and it really stuck in my mind, which is if you take a fork can be used for good reason. You can eat your dinner with a fork, eat your meals with a fork, or you can stab someone with a fork. So you don't regulate the fork, you regulate the purpose. And I think that's quite an important starting point when it comes to AI. What are we trying to regulate? How are we going to regulate it? And also, should that be sector specific? Because at the moment you've got a bit of regulation when it comes to health, a bit of regulation when it comes to financial services, a bit of regulation in the legal sphere. Or is there now an argument for sort of overarching principles that regulate AI across the piece?
Let's move to climate. The first of your 5 missions for Britain, a better Britain, is to secure the highest sustained growth in the G7. I'd love to hear a little deeper about how that pursuit of economic growth is consistent with your climate ambitions. You mentioned clean technology and India and renewables. How do those fit together?
Oh, I think they fit perfectly together. In fact, I think seizing the opportunities when it comes to climate change and the changes we need in our economy are part and parcel of the argument on growth. Because if we push forward, we've got one of our missions. There are 5 missions for an incoming Labour government, and these will determine everything that we do, our priorities, our decision-making, our strategic thinking, our partnership, and staying the course when politics and political events try to knock you off course. But one of them is clean power generation by 2030. This is going to be tough. But if we achieve that, we will have cheaper bills, hugely important for businesses. There's no business in the last 2 years that hasn't felt the impact of higher energy bills. Security in terms of the next generation of jobs. Security in the sense of weaning ourselves off the international market, so tyrants like Putin can't put his boot on our throat in the way that he's trying to at the moment. I all see those as preconditions and part of the story about growth as we go forward. I think the biggest challenge is the fact that almost every country in the world has woken up to the fact that renewables, clean power, is the future of energy and power. There's not really a debate about that anymore. The question is, are we in the race? And are we able to win that race? Now, I think we can. I think offshore wind, onshore wind, these are skills that we're very, very good at. Hydrogen, new nuclear, we can be absolutely in that race. At the moment, we're in the changing room. We've got to have a strategic, because, look what's happening in America. The Inflation Reduction Act, you can feel it's like a magnet for business at the moment.
Or a giant Hoover sucking talent from, for example, the UK to the US, right?
Yeah, so you've got the Inflation Reduction Act under Biden in the US, you've got the EU responding to that, and you've got our Prime Minister and Chancellor sitting it out, saying it's all very unfair.
But
that just means we won't be in the race. And when it comes to economic growth, you've got to be in the race.
But you have delayed plans to borrow $28 billion a year to create this green prosperity fund to a year into the start of a Labour government, right? So what signal does that send?
Well, look, I mean, we're not saying we'll spend nothing until we get to that. We'll ramp it up to that. And in a way, the question on clean power and that investment is not what's the exact amount of money, it's what's the strategic purpose here. Are we going to change our economy, make it work for working people across the whole of the country and take those opportunities? So we'll ramp it up. Obviously, this government has done huge damage to our economy, and that is a fact. And that means, talking about it earlier, interest rates have gone way up, and that means borrowing is more expensive than it was. But what I saw when I delivered that speech on clean power by 2030 on Monday of last week was a doubling down on the commitment, not a backing down.
Okay. Let's talk briefly about your potential role as the next Prime Minister in relationship with Prime Minister Modi. How do you see that working relationship? UK potentially as a diminishing power, India as a growing power?
I think that relationship should be based on the future, not the past, and recognising modern India, future-looking India, and therefore, a respectful, open relationship that does recognise our shared past, but isn't defined only by our past, is actually defined and part of our future going forward.
So there was some discussions about, you mentioned the storied past. Given the history of inequality, of exploitation during the colonial era, how should the UK approach this issue of empire? Does it still have relevance in the modern world? What about the Koh-i-Noor diamond?
Look, it shouldn't be the defining feature of how we go forward. And I think it's very important that we make that point and make that break, if you like. And that, you used the word reset before. This is part of what I mean by resetting the relationship, which is recognising where we are now, rather than defining ourselves by the past.
Okay, so just a few quick-fire questions for you, nothing difficult. Vegan or vegetarian?
Vegetarian.
All right. Bollywood or Hollywood?
Hollywood.
All right. Cricket or football?
Football.
That was easy. Margaret Thatcher or Boris Johnson?
Oh. None of the above.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much to Keir Starmer for your time. Let's give him a huge round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.